Welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires, the podcast where faith meets real life and we figure out how to heal when everything's fallen apart. I'm your host, Melie, and I have lived through the mess and got curious about what actually helps us rebuild, from both faith and brain science. Let's untangle the hard stuff together and find some hope in the rubble. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires, the podcast where we find the sparkly, God-given beauty in life's messiest moments. Today's episode is all about busting a myth, and it's one that I really truly believe has done more harm than good when it comes to how we think about resilience and healing. And that myth is the myth of the bounce back. So today's episode is titled The Bounce Back Myth, What Resilience Actually Looks Like. You know what I'm talking about when I say the myth of the bounce back. You know, you go through something super hard, and the world seems to expect you to bounce back like a super ball off the sidewalk. Quick recovery, no questions asked, you're fine, everything's fine. Somehow, that gets sold to us as true resilience. We're sold this lie that says something like, if it's taking you time to recover, if your heart is still hurting after tragedy, then you must not be resilient. But real resilience, it doesn't look like that. And today, we are going to talk about what it actually does look like through the lens of neuroscience, faith, and everyday human messiness that God still calls beautiful. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dismantle this bounce back myth together. Let's start by talking a little bit about the story that we have been sold. Whether it's on social media, in movies, or sometimes even in well-meaning church culture, there is often this unspoken idea that resilience is about bouncing right back. That if you have enough faith or strength or willpower, you will just get up immediately, shake off the dust, and keep on moving. You know those montages in movies where somebody is going through a tragedy, and then all of a sudden they're jogging again, they're glowing again, they're starting a business, they're redecorating their house and smiling at sunsets. Those are great for inspiration, but let's be real, that is not how life works. Real life is slower, messier, and a lot less scenic. Real life sometimes looks like lying on your living room floor, eating saltine crackers because it's the only thing you can stomach. It's needing to ask for help and feeling embarrassed about it. It's having your faith waver and feeling guilty, but still whispering prayers anyway. Look, we're not bouncing balls. We're humans. And resilience is not a trampoline. It's more like a winding, uneven hiking trail, one that can sometimes feel like it's uphill both ways. And I think it's important to recognize that these things that we are going through are hard. Bouncing back and pretending we're fine might make some of the people around us feel more comfortable, especially if you're someone who has always been looked at as having it all together. But that is not the way that true resilience works. You know, I'll never forget, it was a couple of years ago, and at this point I was already fully divorced, but still really going through it, really going through the healing process. And I was also trying to find new communities, so I felt this need, when I found a group of people or, started attending different church events, to kind of be fine for everybody, and nobody said that I had to do this, but it felt like if I'm going to show up and be the new girl, I better show up with a smile on my face and, have bounced back and be like, yeah, I got divorced and I didn't want it, but I'm fine. Everything's great. And I will never forget this time when I went to, it was a dinner meetup through a church. It was for singles. And a whole group of us got together and had dinner. And this woman that was sitting next to me, we started talking about, our stories and found out we actually had a lot of similarities in our stories. And as I told her what had happened with me and my divorce, she looked at me and she said, I hope you know that what you went through was really hard. Acknowledging that really stuck with me. So much so that years later, I'm here sharing it with you on this podcast. And it's true. It's important to acknowledge, like, hey, we are dealing with difficult things. It's okay that we're not fine, because what we're dealing with is not fine, right? I think we all have these misconceptions of what healing is going to look like. And I totally had misconceptions. I mean, I didn't think I was going to just one day wake up and be happy after my divorce. But as I started to go through it in the very beginning, I had this, I guess you could call it fantasy, even though it wasn't what I actually wanted. And to be honest, I blame this on the movie Under the Tuscan Sun. But I thought, you know what, maybe I can have this glamorous escape. Like maybe I'll buy a little villa in Italy, write a book, rediscover myself, and of course I'll meet a tall, dark, and emotionally available stranger who speaks in poetic metaphors. I thought that healing would be somewhat adventurous, a little bit cinematic, but instead, I got divorced during the COVID lockdown. There were no sweeping views of Tuscany, just 4 walls, a stack of legal documents, and endless cups of coffee alone. My healing looked more like sitting on the floor surrounded by yarn, rewatching YouTube knitting tutorials because it gave my brain something to focus on. I wasn't jet-setting anywhere. I was just trying to finish my latest scarf and finish crying at the same time. So, no, my post-divorce life was not a movie version. It was quieter, not romantic at all, and, let me tell you, a whole lot lonelier. But it was real. And even in that stillness, with my tangled yarn and my tear-stained sweatshirts, God was there. And that is what resilience looked like for me. Not a big comeback, but slow stitching and small prayers. So let's bring in a little brain science, because neuroscience is actually on our side when it comes to challenging this bounce-back myth. Resilience isn't about how fast you recover. It's about how you adapt over time. So from a neuroscience perspective, resilience is tied to a topic that I know I've covered a bunch of times here on the podcast and probably will a bunch more times, but neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and form new neural connections. Think of it like rerouting a train track after a storm. It takes time, effort, and patience. When you go through a trauma or a major stress, parts of your brain light up in different ways. The amygdala, which is your fear center, gets overactive. Your prefrontal cortex, which handles decision-making, logic, and emotional regulation, can go offline. And that isn't a weakness. That is your brain protecting you. That is just human nature. But over time, as you create safety, rest, and connection, your brain can actually recalibrate. It can start to build new patterns. This is why things like journaling, prayer, going to counseling, and even consistent sleep can feel like they rewire your life, because they actually do. So if you've ever gone from feeling like you're drowning in grief to realizing like, hey, I just actually laughed at a meme and it didn't feel weird, that's your brain healing. Romans 12:2 tells us, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That's literally describing what happens with neuroplasticity. God designed our minds to renew. He never says anywhere in Scripture, be instantly fine. He said, be transformed. Transformation is a process, not a moment. Just like the Israelites didn't teleport to the promised land, we don't teleport to resilience. We walk there. Sometimes we limp there. Sometimes we barely feel like we're going to make it there, but we're still going. And that is resilience. So let's talk a little bit more about what resilience really looks like. And spoiler alert, it is not glamorous. Real resilience looks like getting out of bed and brushing your teeth when you feel so depressed and like you shouldn't even bother. Real resilience is showing up to work with tears still drying on your face, but being committed to being there. Real resilience is praying when you don't feel anything, but you do it anyway. Resilience is going to bed at 9 o'clock because you just can't deal with one more thing today. Resilience is letting go of people who don't love you well, even though you wish they would, even though you think you can change them, let them go. Resilience is telling someone, I'm not okay, even when you wish you could fake it. And we all have these moments, where somebody asks us, hey, how are you doing? And we automatically, we're maybe living literally the worst dumpster fire of our lives, but we say, oh, I'm fine. How are you? It's okay to say you're not okay. It is okay to not be okay. And resilience is being willing to admit that. So real resilience is actually these tiny little holy acts of defiance against our despair. I'm going to share a couple of my own tiny but what I consider powerful moments of resilience, not to pat myself on the back, but because I hope that my stories might help you find those tiny moments of resilience for yourself. So one of them, as ironic as it might sound, was actually my decision to put myself back out there on the market, ready to open my heart to someone again. And no, I haven't found love yet, but I've been open and honest, and I haven't shut my heart off and gone all dark. I've had my moments where I've been close to that, and those closest to me know exactly what I'm talking about. But I am genuinely open to the idea that maybe there is love out there for me. And me trying and putting myself out there again and again, that is resilience in action. Another time I can point to is when I walked back into church after my divorce. I had to find a new church because I moved, which meant trying to find new community and new friends. And it has not gone perfectly. I didn't walk into a new church and get welcomed with open arms and pulled into, every activity you could think of. I actually sit alone most Sundays. But I go. I get up, I get out of the house, and I go, and that is resilience in action. And no, I do not do this perfectly. There are plenty of times when I seriously just don't feel like going, and I decide not to, and I stay home, and I watch it online. But I am taking those tiny but powerful steps forward, and I'm trying. Also, let's normalize those backslides, because resilience doesn't mean you don't have hard days. It means that you're not going to let those hard days define you. So, those days when I watch church from home instead of going, I don't need to beat myself up for it. I know I can do better next time. Those times maybe when I wasn't open to love and maybe I had a freak out moment in the app and deleted my account without really thinking about it. I'm human. It happens. We're all human, and that means we will have our moments of strength, but we will also have our moments of weakness, and resilience means accepting yourself along the way. Of course, we don't want to give into those moments of weakness every single time. If I decided, say, with church that, hey, I'm more comfortable watching from home, so I am always going to watch from home, that wouldn't be very resilient. There are times where I have felt like I really want to watch from home and I go anyways, and halfway through I'm like, I gotta go, I've gotta leave. But I took a step, I did something. Those little tiny steps in the right direction are very powerful over time. But don't beat yourself up if you have those moments of weakness. We serve a God who really understands our weakness, and he never shames us for it. Think about these stories. When Elijah was exhausted and ready to give up, God didn't scold him. He sent an angel with a snack and told him to rest. When Jesus saw Mary and Martha grieving over Lazarus, he didn't give them a sermon. He wept. Even Paul, the super apostle, had a thorn in his flesh that wouldn't go away. And God's answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God isn't asking you to bounce back. He's asking you to stay close, to let him carry you when you can't carry yourself, to believe that even if you're crawling, you're still moving. I actually saw a pretty funny meme, well, I think it's funny, that kind of relates to this, and it has to do with that story of footprints. The one where there's footprints in the sand, and the person who's hurting hears God tell them that, where there's only one set of footprints, it was where God had carried the person. And this meme that I saw shows, it has a character for God saying, the one set of footprints is where I carried you. And you see that groove in the sand there? That's where I dragged you. And sometimes it can feel like that, can't it? Healing can feel like we are literally being dragged along the way. But that's the thing. God is with us. God doesn't ask us to just bounce back. He will carry us. He just wants us to stay close. So again, I say, even if you're crawling, you're still moving. And remember that God's timeline is so much different than ours. His measure of strength is completely upside down from the world's. Where the world says, hurry up, get it together, now, be fine. God says, "Come to me, all who are weary." And that means you. God promises to restore us. He promises to heal the brokenhearted. But that doesn't mean that it will happen overnight. If you are going through something, like a divorce or a breakup, you're not going to be able to just one day wake up and be better, like tomorrow. But over time, you will feel better. And trust me when I say I know that sounds like bogus words right now. It probably feels like I will never feel better. You will. Trust me when I say that. I am 4 years post-divorce, and no, I am not happy about my divorce. When I think back on it, it does still make me sad. But that earth-shattering, soul-crushing pain that I felt in the beginning has morphed into more of an acceptance. So it does get better with time. And the if is important there because, there's that saying, time heals all wounds. And that isn't actually like the full story. Time in and of itself doesn't heal all wounds. It does take time, though, and so you can't just be healed tomorrow. It does take time, but time will heal your wounds if you take the right steps. And that means doing things like getting up and going to something, even when you don't feel like it, these resilient steps that we're talking about. But don't push yourself too hard. You have the right to heal slowly and take it to the Lord, because the kind of Savior that we follow is the one who sits with us in the ashes of our dumpster fire and calls us beloved before we're ever okay again. So here is what I want to leave you with today. You are allowed to heal slowly. I'm going to say that again because I feel like we really need to hear this. You are allowed to heal slowly. You are allowed to feel like you're making no progress, even when you actually are. You are allowed to celebrate tiny wins, to cry again, even after weeks of feeling fine, to feel strong and fragile in the same breath. And this is coming from my heart here because there are times when I feel like I am good, I am fully healed, and then something will happen. It could be something as simple as somebody's birthday passing or an anniversary date. Or sometimes, I'll be honest, when I'm at church and I see couples together, that can kind of trigger me to cry. But that doesn't mean that I'm not healing. Crying does not equal not healing. So allow yourself to feel that strength and that fragility in the same moment. You're allowed to rebuild at your own pace. Just because your journey doesn't look like someone else's doesn't mean it's wrong. We all hear these stories about somebody who, had this horrible, traumatic divorce happen and then they found love right away and just everything worked out for them. Well, that's great, but that's not everybody's story, right? You're allowed to rebuild at your own pace. You're allowed to decide, if you're ready to date, if you even want that in your life. And honestly, I don't know if I actually do anymore, but I'm allowed to do that. I'm allowed to change my mind on that. The world's version of resilience, it might be really fast and flashy, but God's version is faithful, gentle, and steady. It looks like staying in the process even when it's hard. So remember, you are not behind, you are not broken, you are not weak, you are becoming. And let me remind you that even diamonds take time to form. They don't pop out fully shaped and polished. They go through pressure, heat, time, cutting, and then they shine. And so will you. So if you are walking through a dumpster fire season right now, I really want you to hear this. So I'm going to speak this to you, and I hope that you hear this in your heart. You are not doing it wrong just because it's hard. God is not disappointed in you or the timeline that you're on. He is with you in the dark, in the slow, and in the silence. You do not need to just bounce back. All you need to do is keep showing up. And that, my friend, is holy. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. If this episode encouraged you, would you please share it with someone who might need the same reminder? And if you are on a path to building more resilience in your life, I want to let you know I have a resource for you. If you go to diamondsindumpsterfires.com/resilience, you can download my resilience checklist, which will just help you kind of stay on track as you try to build resilience. So until next time, keep shining in the mess. You're stronger than you know, and you are absolutely not alone. Bye. That's a wrap on this episode of Diamonds and Dumpster Fires. If you're walking through the ashes right now, remember, you're not broken. You are becoming. Don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend who needs it, and come back next week for more faith, honesty, and a whole lot of heart. See you next time.